We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields.
As McMaster University continues its tradition of virtual Remembrance Day services, it gives us the opportunity to invite you into a building that simply does not have the capacity to hold our in-person Remembrance Day gatherings. Alumni Memorial Hall, like the entire McMaster campus, stands in the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee Nations, within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. This historic building is our university's bricks and mortar monument to the members of the McMaster community who served and died during the two world wars. The plan for what would become Alumni Memorial Hall was born in the midst of World War II, when the doors of the building opened for the first time in 1951. The McMaster community was invited in to see the McMaster Honor Roll, a memorial list of the 56 McMaster men who died in service during the World Wars. Today, in our Remembrance Day service, we also acknowledge the loss of two additional MAC alumni who died more recently during Canada's Afghanistan mission. I believe we have a responsibility to think of these McMaster men as more than simply names on a list. They were and remain individuals with their own stories, friends, and family. Bernard Freeman Trotter is one of those 58 names. He graduated from McMaster when it was still located on Bloor Street in Toronto, began his graduate degree down the road at U of T, but was determined to serve as the war in Europe progressed. The Canadian Army turned him away, declaring him physically unfit for combat. Undeterred, Bernard traveled to England in 1916 and enlisted there. While carrying out his duties as a transportation officer, Bernard was killed around midnight on May the 7th, 1917, by a high explosive shell. According to the letter Bernard's commanding officers sent to the parents of the young lieutenant, Bernard was one of the coolest men he had ever seen under shell fire. But the world is less likely to remember Bernard Freeman Trotter today for his courage than for his art. Before the war, he was already being recognized as a poet of uncommon talent. A collection of poems published posthumously by McClelland and Stewart assured Bernard of a place in the firmament of great poetic voices lost to the war. He wrote his final poem, one entitled Ici Repose, or in English, Here Lies, in April of 1917. The poem is a song of reassurance to the war dead. The letter containing the poem reached Bernard's parents the day after their son was killed, but before they knew he was gone. Today we remember Bernard Freeman Trotter and the 57 other McMaster men of the Honor Roll, and indeed all of the Canadians who have served our nation in the foreign conflicts of the last 11 decades. It can be easy to make Remembrance Day about institutions and nations. I hope that we will always remember that it is also about people. The McMaster Alumni Association and McMaster's historians, librarians, and archivists have been working diligently for years to uncover and share the personal stories of our institution's fallen soldiers. Our annual Remembrance Day service gives our university community a moment of quiet in our busy lives to consider the people who gave so much to secure for us a lifetime of opportunity. On behalf of the McMaster Alumni Association and McMaster University, I thank you for being a part of this important McMaster tradition. Today, we remember.
It is a weird life in many ways, but it is surprising how soon one becomes accustomed to it. The sudden kettle drum staccato of the machine guns searching for working parties, the civil flare of the lights and the dense darkness which succeeds, the whistle of a salvo of shells overhead hardly makes you raise your head unless something is a bit close. Then, of course, you hug the bank, or the bottom of the trench, or wherever you happen to be at the moment, and wait till the row stops, or the lights go out, and carry on.
"5,000 men steal through the night, silent and swift. All is ghost-like, howling wind and rain. And who steer and who watch? Dozens of eyes. Soldiers, sailors, and seamen peer. Is the line straight? Are submarines near? Alone on a haunted bridge seem I, but other heads are there."
Honor Roll, 1914 to 1918. Henry Harold Allen. William K. Anderson. Stanley Howson Brocklebank. William Alexander Chisholm. Robert William Ewart Christie. John Andrew Dow Elder. John Harris Fairchild. Almond Minor Froome. Charles Arnold Grant. William Ernst Hinson. David Hughes. Wilfred John Jones. Robert Charles Kerr. Clarence Mackenzie. Harold Grant Masson. Wilfred Earl McKissick. Archie Alexander Morrow. William Sidney Rice. Roy Clark Steckley. Bernard Freeman Trotter. William Jonathan Wright. 1939 to 1945. Kenner Saul Earl. Murray Arthur Benetto. Nairn Stewart Boyd. Robert Edmund Dorsey. Robert John Edgar. Stanley David Godin. Stephen George Goatley. Robert Dalton Hurd. John Gilchrist Heinrich, Roy Howard Hilgartner, William Devereux Woodruff Hilton, Gordon Roseberg Holder, Charles Montgomery Holman, Frank Joseph Jensen, Richard Gordon Kelly, Charles William MacDonald, George Elwood Matchett, Albert Harry Milden, Albert Edmund McCreary, William E. McKeon, Donald Ray McLean, Rufin Calhoun McNairn, Henry Eugene Novak, Thomas Harold O'Neill, Byron N. F. Rawson, James Gordon Sloan, Charles Leonard Similewski, Robert Lloyd Telfer, Edmund MacLeod II, Frederick Edgar Wellington, John Watson Youst, James Allen Young, John Douglas Young, Harry George Zebedowski, Franklin Charles Suprig. The Afghanistan Mission. Richard Stephen Leary, Raymond Mark Ruckpaul.
A Sea Repose by Bernard Freeman Trotter, McMaster Class of 1915. This was Bernard's last poem, the manuscript of which reached his parents the day after he was killed on May 7th, 1917. O happy dead, who sleep embalmed in glory, safe from corruption, purified by fire, ask you our pity? Ours, mud-grimed and gory, who still must grimly strive, grimly desire? You have outrun the reach of our endeavor, have flown beyond our most exalted quest. Who prate of faith and freedom, knowing ever that all we really fight for is just a rest. The rest that only victory can bring us, or death which throws us brother-like by you. The civil commonplace in which 'twill fling us to neutralize our then too marital hue. But you have rest from every tribulation. Even in the midst of war, you sleep serene, pinnacled on the sorrow of a nation, in cerements of sacrificial sheen. Oblivion cannot claim you, our heroic, war-lustered moment, as our youth will pass, to swell the dusty hoard of time the stoic, that gathers cobwebs in the nether glass. We shall grow old and tainted with the rotten effluvia of the peace we fought to win. The bright deeds of our youth will be forgotten, effaced by later failure, sloth, or sin. But you have conquered time and sleep forever, like gods with a white halo on your brows. Your souls, our lodestars, your death-crowned endeavor, the spur that holds the nations to their vows.
Sego, Sewagwego. Greetings, everyone. Skanagoaga? Do you carry great peace? Santi Smith Daglunyakwa Nyungyats, Gayangihaga. My name is Santi Smith. As Chancellor of McMaster University, and on behalf of McMaster, I am honored to share some reflections with you on this important day of remembrance. Nyawa. Thank you for spending time with us today as we remember and give our gratitude to veterans and their families. Let us unite our minds and hearts to honor and acknowledge the sacrifices many brave individuals have made over the years in the line of duty to protect this land and the ideals of freedom and democracy. In remembering, we can reflect on stories, histories, perspectives, and truths that are as informative and tangible today as they were when the Remembrance Day tradition began more than a century ago. The need to acknowledge our interdependence, our humanity, and relationality is as important now as ever. Many of us are connected to Remembrance Day through our ancestors who served in the 20th century conflicts. As I have mentioned in previous Remembrance Day services, this is the day when I feel the presence of my ancestors who served, including my great-grandfather. He was one of the more than 4,000 Indigenous people who served during World War I. His name was Alexander George Smith, a Gayangahaga leader and warrior, born in Oswego, also known as Six Nations of the Grand River, in 1880. He voluntarily enlisted to fight in the Great War on the very first day possible, November 13th, 1914. He joined the 20th Battalion of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and because he already had military experience, he was commissioned as a lieutenant and served with great distinction in some of the most devastating and historic battles in Canadian history. His is one of the thousands of stories of servicemen and women that can connect us across generations, as individuals, and as the McMaster community, to the sacrifices and legacies of the people who have served our nations in times of war, conflict, and in peace. One of those was Albert Edmund McCreary, born in the first month of 1918 while my great-grandfather was in Europe serving in a conflict that was already being described as the war to end wars. Few declarations have proved more consistently and tragically wrong. Between the world wars, Albert grew up involved in his church and sports. He left high school early to work, but continued his studies at night school. He graduated from Toronto Bible College in 1938 before enrolling at McMaster and beginning his studies in September 1939, in the same week Canada declared war on Nazi Germany. Albert enlisted in the Army in 1942 and was assigned to the Canadian Armoured Corps. He earned the rank of First Lieutenant and completed his tank training in England in 1943, putting him in position to command his own tank unit. Instead, his previous religious training and his mature, caring character put him on a different track when the Army needed chaplains. Albert was ordained in March 1944, appointed chaplain several weeks later, and deployed to France as the Padre of the 22nd Canadian Armored Regiment. During World War II, chaplains were responsible for improving morale. Today, we would recognize that the unit chaplains were the closest thing servicemen and women had to mental health support. Chaplains also found that their role in providing spiritual comfort and often last rites meant that they would frequently participate in transporting the gravely wounded. On May 4th, 1945, Albert and a fellow Canadian officer were attempting to move severely wounded German soldiers out of the line of fire when they were killed. Just 48 hours later, guns fell silent across the battlefields of the continent because of the ceasefire that would ultimately lead to the end of the war in Europe. McMaster's own Albert McCreary was one of the last Canadians to be killed in action in World War II. It seems that every time I learn more about war and the experience of individual people, I am reminded of the importance of care and compassion and peacemaking processes for self and community, and Skana's propagation. Skana is a concept in Gaingeha, the Mohawk language, which means peace and balance. After the experience of conflict, loss, and taking of life, my ancestors conducted condolence ceremonies, the wiping away of tears, not only for their allies, but also their adversaries. Protocols were enacted to help the warriors and soldiers ease the grief, loss, and the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual impacts of war away from their minds and hearts. Their burdens and traumas were acknowledged, and the space around them was cleansed and cleared, opening a pathway to be able to enter back into society, to return to Skana, a state of balance and peace. The condolence process placed great importance on reestablishing productive and positive relationship building, and played a role in 18th century peace treaty negotiations among the Haudenosaunee, the British Crown, and the United States. Taking care of people and community holistically is an essential step to rebuilding and strengthening the home fires within self, family, and community. McMaster's Remembrance Day service provides an annual opportunity to reflect on our mutual responsibilities, especially to the people who served and have served on our behalf, particularly to those with visible or unseen wounds. We are reminded that the renewal of peace is an ongoing cooperative action for all to embrace and to uphold. The men whose names constitute the McMaster Honor Roll, along with the thousands of other men and women who served and returned home, and others who continue to serve today, assumed a truly impressive and selfless responsibility on behalf of the ideals of our nations. Today is a time to remember what they gave and consider what we must give in return, for it is our shared responsibility to build a society capable of sustaining and continually actioning peace and assisting those who are struggling to find Skana. We take a small step toward that goal by coming together today and remembering the sacrifices of the men on the McMaster Honor Roll and all veterans. Skanagoa, may great peace be with you. Onegiwahe, goodbye for now.
With all of the excitement gone, one is dreadfully weary. We were airborne 8 hours and 40 minutes, working under an awful tension. When I got out of the kite, I could scarcely stand. I find it impossible to sleep after a trip like that. It was later learned that the rate had fallen well short of expectations. Though the center of Stuttgart and some suburbs were struck, many of the bombs fell in open country. And of the armada of 863 aircrafts that took part, a total of 27 Lancasters and 10 Halifax were lost, mostly to German night fighters eager for fierce combat.
It is no use pretending. I am heartily sick of it all. There is not much glory, only sordid destruction. I look upon this war as a very dirty job, which definitely must not recur. So many are the narrow escapes that it has seemed a miracle has happened to save me. It is finally getting on my nerves. I am no longer the man I was. However, I will get over it.